quickly. And of course, there are often a lot of tempers around that table, because it's worth pointing out that these ministers have big decisions to make. They all come at it from fairly different points of view. But while we're sitting talking about what ministers might be deciding, there are thousands of businesses out there who have been waiting for answers and waiting days now, really. And we know that these restrictions are due to run out on Friday, so it doesn't give them much time tonight to actually come to this decision.
But something we'll be keeping a close eye on throughout the night, Jane. Richard, I'm going to come to you. Firstly, tell me, where are you? It looks quite festive. Have you put your Christmas tree up for us, or?
And my Christmas tree would never look this grand. I'm in a Belfast City Centre hotel. I was here for BBC Newsline this evening, trying to get a bit of reaction from a hotelier and a hairdresser about where we're at with these restrictions. And this hotel, like many hotels across Northern Ireland, has only been able to welcome certain guests, so the likes of key workers, people who aren't able to return to their own address, the vulnerable. And it's wondering when it can reopen and if that will be on Friday. Now, it needs to tell guests that we can honour your booking or we can't. It needs to order in stock, like drinks and food, to determine, if it can actually offer the full service. And it's not alone. Cafes, restaurants, bars right across Northern Ireland are all at the minute wondering what is going to happen. We're on Tuesday evening. These restrictions expire on Thursday at midnight going into Friday. So it leaves many in a position as they don't know what's going to happen in the next few days. And the clear sense I'm getting from all of them is they just want a decision either way so that they can know what is happening and make decisions on staffing and stock.
Richard, to go back to news on the vaccine for a minute, because we've had so many questions sent in about this today. We obviously heard about that for the first time yesterday. And we heard there, Jane, that Northern Ireland is likely to receive over 500,000 doses of this vaccine. Richard, do we know anything about how this is going to be given out? Alan has got in touch to ask if key workers could be given priority access to this.
Well, the UK government, like many other countries, has bid for or ordered a certain amount of dosage of the vaccine, and it's our understanding, and Jane can correct me here, is that through Barnett consequentials we will receive a certain amount, and those dosages, which may be given in, you require 2 doses over a period of 3 weeks or so in order to give you enough immunity, and that will be given out to certain groups. First of all, you imagine people over a certain age or who are maybe vulnerable, more susceptible to the virus. And then you've got key workers working on the front line in the likes of hospitals, because hospitals, one of the real issues has been the number of staff either contracting the virus or being exposed to and having to self-isolate, and that has caused staffing issues. Just in terms of the announcement from Pfizer about the vaccine, stock markets around the world really reacted quite strongly. I don't think people expected them to react in such a way. You had the likes of EasyJet, British Airways, Aer Lingus, parent company, their shares rocketed because this gave a bit of hope to investors that travel may resume next year at some point. And on the flip side, you had the likes of Netflix, Deliveroo and the exercise bike Peloton. All of their shares fell because there was this, I suppose, anticipation that if we're allowed to go back to some sort of normal life, we won't be using those services in the same way that we have been during lockdown.
Okay, moving away from the vaccine, Richard, we already mentioned under the current lockdown rules, the hospitality sector in Northern Ireland has been shut now for almost 4 weeks and could be facing yet more restrictions. We've had this question sent in and it says, pubs and restaurants already had some of the strictest rules, so why does the Assembly insist on closing them?
Well, I suppose there are 2 factors here. A number of weeks ago, we heard that in terms of hospitality, people that had tested positive had been shown to have been in a hospitality, 30% of cases have been shown to be in a hospitality venue about 48 hours before. Now, there is no suggestion that people contracted the virus in a hospitality setting. It's just that people may have been out while they had the virus and were able to spread it. The other side of this is it comes down to alcohol, and there is a real concern among ministers and health officials that when people do consume alcohol, they drop their guard a bit, they relax a bit, maybe social distancing isn't adhered to in the same way, nor hand hygiene. People may hug, and all of these things will contribute to the spread of the virus, because we know the virus loves when people are together and people are in close contact. But the hospitality sector on the flip side has said, look, we are safe, we are subject to strict restrictions, we have our screens in, we have staff masked, we have our hand sanitisation, contact tracing, we're taking everybody's name and number so that we can call them if there is any sort of case or we have to do some sort of contact tracing. So many will say they put in all of the measures that they were asked to and are still being punished. But it's a fine line for the health officials and ministers to walk, and hospitality venues and hospitality industry groups have said that they don't envy the executive, because they know it is an incredibly difficult task to try and weigh up whether or not to open the economy more or to try and curb the spread of the virus.
Well, Cian, has there been any opposition in the Assembly to the closure of the hospitality sector? Is that why we haven't had a decision yet or heard anything yet?
I mean, that is certainly one of the big factors, Jordan. And just before I come on to that in more detail, Richard talked about this being the fine line. And I think one of the things that is worth pointing out in all of this is that back when these initial restrictions were introduced almost a month ago, at the time, you'll remember that schools also had to close for a 2-week period. And the thinking from health officials has always been that ultimately, if you want to keep the rate of infection of coronavirus low, below 1, which is what we are always told, then ultimately that means keeping schools and hospitality closed. And if you have one or both of those open, then the likelihood is that R is going to be above 1. And so we know that the executive has already made keeping schools open its priority, and ministers have said that a number of times. And so I think the sense has been, rightly or wrongly from ministers sometimes, that ultimately something else was going to have to give. And in this case, it appears to have been hospitality. Now, I think given the fact that the furlough scheme was extended last week right up until March, I think that will have influenced minds around Stormont and made it easier for them to perhaps take this decision to keep hospitality closed. But you're right, even today I was watching a debate at Stormont in the Assembly chamber. They were talking about the budget, but it got on to COVID, and ultimately we saw a number of political parties, interestingly a DUP backbench MLA, Paul Frew, actually coming out and criticising his own party for not being able to take a decision on this, and also saying that it was a disgrace that businesses were being left effectively in limbo, and that it was unfair that it seemed to be hospitality businesses that were losing out time and again, and that even if ministers come to some sort of decision tonight, as Richard was saying, ultimately if they're allowed to reopen on Friday, then most of them won't do so anyway, because it's just too late for most of them to get their supply in this weekend. So you do get the sense that up at Stormont, ministers are aware of the pushback that there's going to be, and time and again it comes back to this balance between lives, livelihoods and liberties. The 3 L's is how we put it, and ministers are trying to navigate us through this latest wave of the pandemic, but there are those who feel that by doing this kind of half open, half out lifting of restrictions, it ultimately makes things even more confusing for people. And that's why Robin Swan and his officials had asked for the extensions to be, or restrictions to be entirely extended for another couple of weeks to get us to Christmas, and perhaps we would maybe manage to not have any further restrictions around Christmas, although that can't be guaranteed either. We have to remember this is a completely fluid situation.
Jane, you mentioned the C word there, Christmas. We're going to come back to that in a bit more detail later. But just to pick up on something else you said, Richard, Jane was talking about furlough there. What other compensation, or what compensation is currently in place at the minute to protect people and businesses? That's a question that we've had sent in.
Okay, so this is a bit complicated, so bear with me. So we have the Department of Finance. It has opened a localised restrictions fund. Now, that opened for applications in the middle of October for the Derry City and Strabane District Council area, because remember, it was subject to restrictions before the rest of Northern Ireland. That scheme was then rolled out Northern Ireland wide across all council districts. And what that basically aims to do is pay businesses forced to close under executive restrictions a certain amount of money per week that they are closed based on their rateable value. Now, that means that cafes, hotels, restaurants, cinemas, galleries, exhibition centres, all of these places that were forced to close can apply for some sort of help. The department has received 11,000 applications so far. About more than 2,000 have paid out to the value of £7 million or so. But the department says that about 300 so far, and they expect this number to rise greatly, have been rejected because they were not eligible for the criteria. And then that is where the Department for the Economy schemes come into play, and that is for the businesses that fall through the cracks, essentially. So one of the schemes that we have in place, Scheme A, let's call it, it has opened for applications for a number of weeks now, and it allows the likes of driving instructors and mobile hairdressers that don't essentially have a physical business presence that is forced to close, but their operations are affected, to apply for some sort of help to try and get them through. We then have Part B, which at the minute is yet to open, and that's for the supply chain, because you imagine this hotel I'm in every week will order so much food, so much drink for its guests, but it hasn't been able to do that at the minute. And the people that they order from will mainly be local traders, local businesses, and those local businesses now have seen part of their business essentially wiped out. It's non-existent because venues like this are closed. So those businesses in the supply chain are due to get some extra help, but as I say, that fund is yet to open. And then, of course, Jane mentioned the extension of furlough. We also have the extension of the self-employed help from the government, but again, that still misses out on quite a number of people I've been speaking to. We have the likes of Excluded NI highlighting this, that if you're the director of your own company and you're running your own business that way, that you haven't had any help since March. So while there are various schemes out there, real concerned people are still falling through the cracks.
Okay, we'll move on to something completely different here. Now, throughout the course of the pandemic, people have had to chop and change their wedding plans quite a bit to keep in line with the changing restrictions. Over the weekend, we even saw that video of a couple having their first dance on the street outside Belfast City Hall. But we've had lots of questions sent in today about weddings. Richard, seeing as you're in a hotel at the minute, I think it probably makes sense to stick with you for this one. Where are we currently on weddings, and are we expecting wedding receptions to be able to go ahead again after the end of this week?
Well, yes, I am in a hotel, and I have been told by a number of hoteliers that they have weddings booked for this weekend, and they don't know if they can go ahead. At the minute, wedding ceremonies can take place, but there cannot be a reception. And we know before there were restrictions on certain elements of weddings, but as we stand, a reception cannot take place unless those restrictions are loosened or changed or amended as part of any announcements that we're expecting through the week. But I do know Jane was looking at weddings as part of her many Q&As that she's had to file over the last number of weeks and months.
Yeah, we've. I was just going to come in on that actually, if possible, because what we're hearing tonight from Stormont as well, I'm understanding from some of this paper proposals that have been tabled by Diane Dodds, is that actually, Richard, one of the proposals is to allow hotels to reopen from Friday to serve food and drink to residents. Now, we didn't know that before. That's obviously something that has kind of come on to the discussion table pretty late tonight. So you would imagine there'll be a lot of maybe, anxiousness and wonder from hotel federations and representatives about whether or not this will get the go-ahead from other executive ministers, because I am understanding that there's some pushback from other parties towards the DUP for saying, how on earth could the executive advise no unnecessary travel, but yet ask the executive to then reopen hotels this weekend. So that just gives you a sense of some of the things that are under consideration tonight. But certainly, from what I'm also told, there's nothing around weddings on the table at the moment, unfortunately. And I know a couple of brides personally who have actually pushed things back to 2021 to try and avoid what's going on at the moment, because things are just so difficult at the minute.
And just as Jane mentions hotels there, it shows you how fast moving this is, because we didn't actually think we had a date as of 45 minutes, an hour ago. But one wonders if people or hotels will actually press ahead and open, because from speaking to industry sources over the last 2 days, yesterday saw a raft of cancellations across hotels in Northern Ireland, because I think people just felt that it's not going to happen, and actually what sort of experience are we going to be able to have, because at that time there was plenty of talk that you could maybe get a meal but not an alcoholic drink. So you wonder if hotels are told tonight, yeah, you can serve residents at the weekend, how many people will be booked into hotels, and actually how many hotels will be able to get the stock in time to serve those residents.
It's obviously something a lot of people will be thinking about, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. Right, the thing that's in the back of everybody's minds, Jane has already mentioned it, Christmas. Jane, you know yourself, Christmas, we want to
I have a
visit our
tree,
families.
don't apologise.
Richard has a tree, he's right in the festive spirit already, but we want to visit our families, we want to spend time together. Finn got in touch earlier today about this, and he's asking what the latest is. What's the likelihood we'll be able to visit family and friends over the Christmas period, Jane?
I mean, I think that's a really difficult one, and of course it's the big question on everybody's mind, whether or not you can have a typical turkey dinner and, you know, play board games with your family and watch proper Christmas TV. Unfortunately, at the minute, we just don't have an answer to that. What the executive is dealing with at the minute is really looking ahead to the next couple of weeks and whether or not coming up to the Christmas period, it's going to be feasible for businesses to operate, for hospitality and for retail to try and claw back some of the profits that they have lost over the past couple of months because we've been under heavier restrictions. The idea of household restrictions is something that I haven't even really heard mentioned in recent days by ministers, but there is an awareness that they want to try and get us back to a place where it might be possible to maybe have a little bit more contact with family around the holiday period. Nicola Mallon, for example, the infrastructure minister, last week was pretty clear. She appeared on one of our TV programmes, The View, and she was saying that she'd be in favour of keeping these current restrictions in place for another couple of weeks if we could get the R number down low enough that we could potentially have a more normal Christmas. Now you contrast that to what you're hearing coming out of other devolved governments, the likes of Scotland, for example. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister there, has said that people should prepare for a digital Christmas. So it's maybe not time to be putting away the likes of, you know, your Zoom and your Skype logins yet. I think, unfortunately, Jordan, the short answer is we don't really know. And then, of course, there are the bigger questions around what happens for people travelling home at Christmas as well. Arlene Foster was talking about trying to get a solution in place for students to come home for Christmas today, although I'm not sure that anything has officially been worked out yet, and there are due to be more talks between our government at Stormont and the other three governments across the UK about this. And then, of course, our ministers are going to have to talk to ministers in the Republic of Ireland as well, because we know that so many people cross the border into the Republic and back every day too. So I think, unfortunately, it's the case of, while we'd all love to be looking ahead and planning for Christmas now, given that things are just so unpredictable with the virus, I think that's going to have to wait to maybe a little bit nearer the time. But certainly I'd still be getting your Christmas shopping done now. If you're anything like me, you're a planner and you'd already have started that. I don't know about either of you.
Oh, well, I certainly haven't started my Christmas shopping. But Richard, Christmas is a big time for families, but also in normal times, it's the busiest time of year for businesses. What can they expect this Christmas?
Well, the Finance Minister, Conor Murphy, told me just last week, he said, look, business is not going to be the same this Christmas for retail and for hospitality. And if we take hospitality, first of all, hospitality would make a great deal of money in the 4 weekends up to Christmas, with people catching up with friends, or if people have come home and you want to meet them for a meal or a drink. And then also we have to think about Christmas parties. That's a big source of revenue for exhibition centres like Titanic Belfast, for hotels like the one I'm in, and just for restaurants and pubs in general. And I know some businesses are planning their Christmas dues to do them via Zoom or Skype. They're booking entertainment to be performed over Zoom or Skype. I'm not sure how keen I'd be on that myself, I have to say, but I think a real concern amongst hospitality, because they would make so much money in the Christmas season that it would tide them over during the leaner months like January, the start of February. As for retail, I suppose hospitality brings people in the city and town centres, so there's been a dip in footfall given the current restrictions, but also I suppose a concern that we have shifted our habits, because I now find myself shopping online more than I would have done before the pandemic, and because a lot of us are in the house more than we normally would have been, because we're lucky enough to be able to work from home, you're there to get the packages that are arriving from wherever you've ordered. So you have to weigh up here. Retail will be wondering, will people's habits change, or will we be out of the restrictions enough for people to want to come into town and city centres? And I can tell you that I know that the hospitality sector, it has essentially written off any prospect of having big Christmas do's, having large groups of office workers in the one room.
Well, we're talking there about, Zoom codes. Jane was saying, Richard, you're talking about potentially having Zoom Christmas parties. Before we go, there's one more question I wanted to ask. This is actually from me because I'm dying to know the answer. Richard, did you win your Zoom quiz over the weekend?
He's gonna lie and say yes.
I'm not, because I have too many people that would be on that would tell me I'm lying. No, I think we came third or fourth in the Zoom quiz. Wasn't great, have to say, but it was the first one back, so
not too shy. Well, Jane, you're a bit of a quizzer, probably very happy about the return of Zoom quizzes.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say happy. We started them way back at the start of the pandemic in March and kept them up actually right the way through lockdown and then out of lockdown, because the pub quiz that we used to go to hadn't started again. So I kind of never really gave it up during lockdown. It has stopped the past couple of weeks, but I probably need a bit of a break before I get back into it for Christmas. But I always win.
It's always good to have Jane on your quiz team, because the Children in Need quiz is usually taking place at this time of year, run by Barabest, and if you've Jane on your team, you know it's going to be a good result.
Trivia queen of the newsroom. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you to everyone who got in touch. We didn't have enough time to get back to everyone who sent in questions, but hopefully we've helped you make some sense of what's happening this week and what's to come. Don't forget, you can keep up to date with all the latest developments on the BBC News NI website, which you'll find